Here we're given some trig functions, and we're trying to figure out what they are based on knowing some other information. I'm going to start with the one that's numbered number 3. We've got tangent of theta is equal to -3/4, and that sine of theta is less than 0. What the heck, we might as well add some other information here because we don't really have an instruction, at least not on this page. So I'm going to say this, we're trying to find cosine of theta. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is identify what quadrant this is in. And I'm going to use the idea that sine is the y value, and if y is less than 0, then the first thing we have to be aware of is that we're talking about one of the quadrants that are below the x-axis. The next thing I have to understand is that tangent is the y value divided by the x value. That's going to be negative if one of these two things is negative. So tangent could be negative if either x was negative but y is positive, or y was negative but x is positive. And what we find is that this has to happen in quadrant 4. Okay, so that's the first kind of step of this. The big piece we have to get from this is that for this, cosine should be greater than 0 as well. The second part is making sense of this triangle. So here I'm going to build a reference triangle. I'm going to call this theta for now. And I'm going to describe this as -3/4. If I know that tangent is opposite over adjacent, I also know that in this quadrant the opposite's the -1, although for the purpose of this it doesn't actually matter much. We get -3 for the opposite, 4 for the adjacent. If I use the Pythagorean theorem, we get -3 squared plus 4 squared is equal to that hypotenuse squared. That's going to give us h is equal to 5 once we do that. Last part, define cosine of theta. I'm going to use that triangle that I built. I know that it's down here, so cosine is positive. I know that cosine is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. So in this case, we're looking at +4/5. For the one labeled number 4, let's just try to find, I don't know, cotangent of theta. So I'm going to start the same way. We're told a couple of different pieces of information. The first piece of information is that cosine of theta is less than 0. I know cosine is going to be x. And if x is less than 0, what we're really talking about is this over yonder, the left part of this graph. The other piece of this is dealing with cosecant. Cosecant we know is the reciprocal of sine. And if this is positive, that means that sine has to be positive as well. For us, that means we're looking at the top half of this graph.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
When we combine these two pieces of information, we know we're looking at the second quadrant. So now let's build our triangle. So in this, we've got cosecant, which we know is the reciprocal of sine. So here we've got the hypotenuse and the opposite. For my triangle, we've got 17, and for the opposite, that'd be 8. So if this is our adjacent, we can say we're looking at a squared plus 8 squared is equal to 17 squared. That's going to give us a is equal to 15. So when we do 15 here, now we're ready to find cotangent. We know cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, and that if tangent is opposite over adjacent, this is adjacent over opposite. When I plug this in, we're looking at adjacent 15, opposite 8. We end up getting 15/8 is our answer. The last thing I need to do is figure out if this is positive or negative. In the second quadrant, where we have a positive y but a negative x, here cotangent should be negative. And when we figure that out, this has got to be -15/8. You might also have taken a look at that when building this triangle and realize that the x value should be negative here.